Hello and welcome to Alma 43. Let's get started. Doctrine is unchanging truth, and a principle is a rule that can guide your life. So there's two parts to this chapter. There's the military strategy, and then we'll pull out some doctrine and principles. We know that there's war. We know that there was a prophet involved. And it's curious to see the causes of both the Nephites and the Lamanites. We'll get more into that later. So this is an account of the wars. It's in the 18th year of the reign of the judges. So the Nephites saw the Lamanites were coming upon them, so they made preparations for war, and they gathered in the land of Jershon. The Lamanites came with their thousands, and they gathered in the land of Antionum. And their leader was named Zarahemnah. And of course, the leader of the Nephites is Captain Moroni. So Moroni's troops meet with the Lamanites on the borders of Jershon. And the Nephites are armed with swords and scimitars, which is curved swords, all manner of weapons of war. So there's, who knows what those are. I'm just going to say bow and arrow. There's probably hammers and whatever else. But bow and arrow, breastplates, shields, shields to defend their heads, helmets, thick clothing. And so there's a list of everything that we just read. Now, Zarahemnah's army had no such thing. They were basically naked. They had loincloths, and that was about it. But they were not armed with breastplates and shields. So we know they don't have breastplates, shields, helmets, no mention of thick clothing. So that's what they're up against. So because of that, they were afraid to fight the Nephites at this time, even though they had greater numbers. And so they departed out of the land of Antionum, and they went down on their way to Manti. They weren't there yet. They just started towards Manti. Okay, Moroni sends out spies, so he knows what they're doing. But Moroni is smart. He also knows Alma is a prophet. And Alma's back in Zarahemnah. So he sends some messengers to ask Alma to ask the Lord how they can defeat the Lamanites. Alma prays, receives revelation that the Lamanites are heading towards the land of Manti, and the messenger goes and tells that to Moroni. So now Moroni leaves a part of his army behind, and then he heads over to Manti to protect that part of the land. When he's there, he calls the people in that area to come and help. And so Moroni takes up camp in the valley, which was near the river Sidon on the west side of the river. So I'm just going to show them there. And then he placed more spies. And then he divided his army and concealed another part of his army on the south and the east of the hill Riplah. Okay, so we got an army on the west, army on the east. Okay, the Lamanites come to the north of the hill, and then they pass the hill and they begin to cross the river. The army which is concealed on the south is led by Lehi, and he goes in behind the Lamanites. The Lamanites notice this, and then they have a battle. The work of death commences. So there's a battle, and we know that because of the nakedness of the Lamanites, that they have more casualties. Now and then there was a man that fell among the Nephites by their swords and loss of blood, but they were shielded because of the armor that they have, and so they were a little more protected than the Lamanites. The Lamanites are frightened. They begin to flee towards the river Sidon. They're driven by Lehi into the waters. And then Moroni's army approaches from the other side, and there we have it. Now, at this point, there's another battle, and never had the Lamanites been known to fight with such exceedingly great strength and courage. They did fight like dragons. They Nephites were slain. They did smite in two many of their head plates, pierce many breastplates, smote off the arms. So this is a pretty gruesome battle, and the Nephites are starting to suffer casualties. And so we know their numbers are diminished. Now, the Nephites are inspired by a better cause. They were not fighting for monarchy nor power. They were fighting for their homes, their liberties, their wives, children, rights of worship, church, religious freedom. And then we learn a principle. Inasmuch as ye are not guilty of the first offense or the second offense, ye shall not suffer yourselves to be slain by the hands of your enemies. You can defend your families even unto bloodshed. Now the Lamanites are fighting fiercely. The men of Moroni are about to shrink and flee. Moroni perceives this, and then he inspires them with those thoughts of their lands, their liberty, their freedom. Doesn't say their families. I'm sure their families because it was mentioned previously. So they turned upon the Lamanites, and then they cried unto God. So they are not only fighting for all of those things that we mentioned, but they now pray to God. They begin to stand against the Lamanites with power. In the very hour that they cried unto the Lord, they gain strength. Okay, even though the Lamanites are more numerous, more than double, the armies of Moroni encircle them, and on both sides, of course, we can see that. And they're struck with terror, the Lamanites are. And when Moroni sees their terror, he commands his men that they will stop shedding Lamanite blood. Okay, so that's that chapter. Quick review. Principles. If you're not guilty of the first offense or the second, ye shall not suffer yourselves to be slain, and ye shall defend your families even unto bloodshed. So those are some rules that can guide our lives. Some questions I have to myself as I'm reading this, and maybe to you. What is your cause? We can see that the Lamanites had a cause in this chapter, and the Nephites had a cause. What is your cause? Why do you do what you do? What are your motives? Deep down, we all know what our motives really and truly are. What are they? Let's look at the Lamanite cause. Lamanites wanted to preserve Amalekite hatred towards the Nephites. They wanted to gain power over the Nephites. They wanted to bring the Nephites into bondage. The Nephites, we are told, were inspired by a better cause. Their homes, liberties, wives, children, and religious freedoms. I'm curious about all the preparation that was done in this chapter. D&C 38 says, if you're prepared, you shall not fear. How did the Nephites prepare for battle? Well, we saw that they did everything they could. They gathered swords and scimitars and bows and arrows, and then they shielded themselves as well with breastplates, shields, helmets, and even the clothing. Lamanites weren't nearly so prepared. They didn't have all of those other things. So you can see how preparation helped the Nephites in battle. So that leads to the question, what are the battles that you face? Especially spiritual battles, but also temporal. And how are you preparing to face those battles? With respect to preparation, it's important to note that the Nephites also consulted a prophet. They consulted Alma. So we have to make our preparations. We should consult the words of the prophets so that we can gain greater wisdom from them as we make our preparations in whatever it is that we need to prepare for. Our inner battles, our spiritual battles, temporal things. Okay. They also prayed to God. And remember, they received help in the very hour that they prayed. So it's good to pray. It's also good to do everything that you can do to prepare as much as possible. And I also learned here that we should involve the Lord in both spiritual and temporal matters. So way back in Alma 34, with respect to prayer, he says, cry unto God against the power of your enemies. Well, we can see that in a literal sense in this chapter. Cry unto him against the devil, who is the enemy of all righteousness. Cry unto him over the crops of your fields. We have to provide a living. We have to deal with money and food and goods and all that stuff, and we're supposed to pray about that. Why wouldn't we involve God in our temporal matters? Cry over your flocks. Okay, so once again, what is your cause, and why do you do what you do, and what are your motives? Okay, that's my take on this chapter. Thanks for listening.